26 years ago this week, on April 2nd, 1995, you can't mention WrestleMania 9 as one of the worst WrestleManias of all time without including this show on that list. Built around former NFL star Lawrence Taylor, wrestling Bam Bam Bigelow in the main event. They had a decent match. And I guess when you pay somebody $500,000, they're going to get the main event spot, whether they deserve it or not. Yokozuna returned for the first time since Survivor Series, heavier than ever, as Owen Hart's mystery partner to win the tag team titles from the Smoking Guns. They put Yokozuna in the team because his weight was so bad. He was so morbidly obese, even by that point in 90, and it would only get worse, but even in 95, he was so morbidly obese, they couldn't book him as a full-time single anymore. He just couldn't do it. So it was going to be Jim Neidhart originally was going to be Owen's tag team partner. They had been together for most of 94 when Jim made his return. But he no-showed some events around, I think it was like around Christmas time, and he got fired. So Neidhart was gone. Then there was some chatter that Chris Benoit might be brought in as Owen's partner. In fact, Benoit did do some dark matches for the company in 95, and there's even pictures of him coming down to the ring with Ted DiBiase. They put DiBiase in his corner as his manager. They ended up not hiring him. I think those dark matches came months after WrestleMania. But in some of the newsletters at that time, there definitely was some chatter about Benoit possibly being the partner, but they went with Yoko instead. Now, in his book, Bret Hart called his match with Bob Backlund, they had an I Quit match on the show. He called it, without a doubt, my worst pay-per-view match ever. And he ain't wrong. My cable went out during the finish of this match, just as Backlund was trying to lock in the chicken wing. I got a blue screen. Not the blue screen that my Windows 10 machine gives me, but I got a blue screen from the cable provider. When it finally came back on a few minutes later, Bret was already celebrating. His music was playing, so I missed the whole finish. But this match was no good. Diesel defended the WWF title in the semi-main against Shawn Michaels. Vince McMahon insisted that Diesel kick out at 1 after eating a super kick from Shawn Michaels, which both men argued against. Diesel rightfully thought that it's going to turn the crowd against me. He was already being shoved down people's throats. He was already well aware of this. He goes, please, let's not do this. This is not going to go over well with the audience. Vince McMahon insisted on it. They did the spot, and sure enough, the fans booed. And in his book, Shawn Michaels says that Vince McMahon admitted later on after the show that it was a mistake. The powerbomb at the finish of that match always irks me. Even back then, it irked me. Because I knew it looked like shit. Michaels over-rotated on the jackknife, landed on his ass. He almost landed on his feet. Kevin Nash is convinced. I mean, they're best friends, Nash and Michaels, but, you know, wrestling is very competitive. They were fighting for the same spot. Even then, even though they were best of buds. He knew that Shawn wanted to be in the spot that he was in. And I don't doubt for a second the possibility that Shawn Michaels had or harbored a lot of jealousy to Nash, because Michaels had been in the company for a number of years. Michaels, I think, is the one who helped bring Kevin Nash into the company. And now Kevin Nash is in the spot that he's in before he ever had a chance to even get there. So how could there not be any kind of underlying jealousy on his part? Nash, in shoot interviews, has talked about how he is convinced that Shawn did that on purpose at the finish. He fucked up the jackknife on purpose to try to make him look bad. He was very open about it in one of his shoots with Sean Oliver. He says that even though they were friends, he knew that Shawn was gunning for his spot. Everybody in the locker room knew it. They were very competitive in that way. And he is sure that Shawn took the move that way on purpose to sabotage him. But they had a good match. Not as good as their Good Friends, Better Enemies match the following year, but it was still a good match. And for his 12 minutes of work in the main event, losing to Lawrence Taylor, Bam Bam Bigelow earned $250,000, he claimed, or half of what LT pulled in for the event. Jim Cornette remembers that LT, he was so blown up when the match was over. As soon as he got back through the curtain, he had to be placed in a chair. As soon as he got to the back, he couldn't even speak. The following year, on March 31st, 1996, WrestleMania 12. Can you believe it's been 25 years since the Iron Man match between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels? Unbelievable. I still have a matte plaque from that show that has a piece of the canvas in it. The Huckster took on the Nacho Man on the free-for-all pre-show with Billionaire Ted as the guest referee. When Vader came into the company, which was only a couple of months before this, made his debut at the Royal Rumble, he had a bad shoulder, which apparently was only getting worse. It was really nagging him. That's why they shot the angle on Raw the night after he debuted at the Rumble, and he assaulted Gorilla Monsoon, and they suspended him. You would think, why are they suspending this guy? He literally just made his debut. He had to have surgery. So that was their way of getting him off TV. So he goes and he has shoulder surgery. Vince McMahon then a few weeks later calls him and says, hey, we need you for WrestleMania. And Vader was not happy about that. But he's brand new in this company and the boss says, we need you. So what's he going to do? Tell him to piss off? So originally this was going to be a singles match. And they actually announced it on television. They had a graphic for it and everything. It was going to be one-on-one Yokozuna against Vader. It turned into a 6-man tag. I'm assuming that was done at least in part because of Vader's injury. But it turned into Vader, Owen Hart, and the British Bulldog against Yoko, Ahmed Johnson, and Jake the Snake Roberts. Which actually turned out to be a pretty good match, as I recall. The Miami Alley fight. You might be asking, a Miami what? What are you talking about? There was a Miami Alley fight that was originally scheduled between Goldust and Razor Ramon. It was set up in a segment on television that never actually aired on TV, but it was included on a recent unreleased matches, unreleased segments, WWE DVD. This whole interview segment with Razor and Roddy Piper, who was the interim acting president on television at the time, setting up what would have been a Miami Alley fight between Razor and Goldust, who had been feuding at that time. Goldust had beaten Razor at the Rumble to win the IC title. That segment, by the way, was up on the network. So good luck finding it now, because I don't think you will. But it never took place because Razor had faxed his resignation letter the month prior to Vince McMahon. He was on his way out. He was leaving for WCW. He also failed a drug test around that time, so they took him off the show. They replaced him with Roddy Piper in what they instead called a Hollywood backlot brawl against Goldust, first half of which was filmed 3 weeks before the pay-per-view. It was edited into the show to make it look like it was happening live. But that was not the original plan for Roddy Piper on this show. Not only did Goldust have a different opponent originally, Piper had a totally different opponent, and it was an opponent that you would never guess. Ramon was going to fight Goldust, but according to Bruce Pritchard, the plan was for Piper to have a match with OJ Simpson. 6 months after he was acquitted of brutally murdering 2 people. Pritchard said, I remember calling Roddy and pitching him the idea, which he was for. We had preliminary talks with OJ's people, who at that point were looking for anything that had a paycheck attached to it. We floated the idea out there. We did talk to OJ's people. I talked to Piper about it. Piper was on board. If you go back in the early time of Piper's reemergence with WWE, he does make comments about OJ Simpson. He makes comments about right and wrong in America, and what's going on, and that he's here to make things right in the WWF. The end game was going to be a one-off and have Piper beat the shit out of OJ Simpson at WrestleMania. But once that started getting out beyond the inner circle of OJ's people and out in Hollywood, the backlash was deafening. The people were like, if you do this, you'll never have another sponsor. Just extremely, extremely negative. So we punted. We thought the end game of OJ getting the shit kicked out of him would satisfy some people. As those words come out of my mouth, you realize how ridiculous it is today. but you always have to try something even if it sounds ridiculous. And that, folks, is what it means to be in the wrestling bubble. Think about how fucking absurd that sounds. I think as Pritchard was saying it, it sounds like he realized how ridiculous it sounded even as he was telling that story. The fact that, we thought it would be cool because, here in this fake fight, we're going to have Piper, pretend to be kicking the shit out of OJ Simpson, who would be getting a big payday out of it. But hey, he would be getting fake beaten up, so it's all good, right? That is the definition of being in the wrestling. Actually, that's the definition of being a fucking idiot is what that is. So, thankfully, that didn't happen. By the way, I think that last statement he made about you have to try something, even if it's ridiculous. You always got to try something, even if it sounds stupid. I think that last statement explains a lot when it comes to their shows today. They obviously were planning something with OJ because they even replicated the White Bronco chase with Piper and Goldust during their backlot brawl. They brought back the Ultimate Warrior on this show, who looked so out of place here in 1996. Physically, he looked great. He was back in his warrior shape. His hair had grown back out longer. He had cut it years before. I think that the fact that he had cut his hair short and that he was so much smaller when he came back in 92, that is what spurred on all the rumors that the Ultimate Warrior died in a car accident. This is the fake Ultimate Warrior. There was only one Ultimate Warrior. This version of the Warrior in 96 looked more like the Warrior of old. So he looked fine, but he just looked out of place in what was this new generation era, an era of guys who were smaller, who didn't look all big and jacked up like he did. So it was just weird. And he squashed Triple H in 90 seconds in Triple H's first WrestleMania match. He took the pedigree. He got right back up and totally no-sold it, which was not the original plan. But when Triple H went to Warrior with some ideas on what they could do, Warrior basically, in so many words, said, "Fuck you. No, we're going to do it my way." And of course, he didn't last much longer after that, did the Warrior, because he was a raving lunatic. And the Iron Man match. Iron Man match is held up as this all-time classic. I think it's a very good match, but it's not even the best Iron Man match that I've ever seen, let alone the best match. I've said before, I think this match is very overrated. That doesn't mean it's a bad match. I just think it's very overrated by people. My opinion. The two of them didn't even put the match together until the day of the show. Didn't even talk about it. And then that day they sat together for about 3 hours, putting the entire thing together. Total pros. That's all they needed. 3 hours to put together a 61-minute match. The next night on Raw, Mick Foley debuted as Mankind. Vince McMahon did not want to hire Mick Foley. Multiple times they turned down the chance to hire Mick Foley. It was Jim Ross who went to bat for him. And Vince McMahon said, "You know what, JR? I'm going to let you hire this guy because sometimes you have to let certain talent break your heart." He was convinced that this was not going to work out, and he said, "It's on you. If it doesn't work out, it's on you." I think it worked out. I would say that signing worked out pretty well. Not only did it work out pretty well, but Mankind to me is still the greatest of all of the Undertaker's opponents. When I look back at all the feuds and the rivalries, I mean, Undertaker may have had better matches with Shawn Michaels and stuff, and I know people look back fondly on the matches with Kane and the whole storyline with Kane. I will always maintain that Mankind is Undertaker's greatest rival. He gave Undertaker a run for his money in 96 from the day he walked in, the way that nobody else ever did. And the matches they had, from their Boiler Room Brawl at SummerSlam, obviously Hell in a Cell at the King of the Ring, they had a lot of matches in between there. He is Undertaker's greatest rival. 23 years ago this week, on March 29th, 1998, the Austin era began at WrestleMania 14. Chris Warren and the DX Band opened the show by butchering America the Beautiful. A lot of people in the back hated it. The only person who seemed to like it was Vince McMahon. But it was edited off the network version of WrestleMania. It is not on the Peacock version either. Sable and Mark Merrow beat Luna Vachon and Goldust in Sable's first match, or at least her first big match. Luna claimed that she was told if she so much as put a black and blue mark on Sable, if she hurt her in any way, accidentally, if anything happened, she would be fired. She never said who said that to her, but that's what she claimed she was told. Luna put a lot of effort in to make Sable look her very best in that match, and the only person who came up to her when the match was over, when they got back through the curtain, the only person who came up to her to give her a pat on the back for a job well done was Owen Hart. She said that meant a lot to her. Mick Foley tagged with Terry Funk as Chainsaw Charlie on this show against the New Age Outlaws in a dumpster match for the tag team titles, but he had proposed a very different idea for WrestleMania. Him and Funk not as partners, but as adversaries. He had proposed to Vince McMahon the idea of a best-of-7 deathmatch series, leading to the 7th and final match of WrestleMania live via satellite from Funk's Double Cross Ranch down in Texas. A no-ropes, barbed wire, exploding C4 deathmatch. He pitched the idea to Vince McMahon, who was on board with it, but with a lot of media eyes on the show due to Mike Tyson's involvement, the idea got nixed. Kane, Tombstone Pete Rose before his match with The Undertaker, and Stone Cold Steve Austin pinned Shawn Michaels to win his first WWE title with Iron Mike Tyson counting the 3, turning against DX. Austin winning the title from his old rival Bret Hart was considered as the early main event for WrestleMania in '98. But then something happened in Montreal and suddenly Bret was unavailable. But that would have been the natural match if Bret had stuck around, if that never happened. And Bret was still the champion. He never dropped the belt. Austin never did get a straight-up pinfall win over Bret on TV. Would have made sense to have Austin finally get that big win, beat Bret, and become the champion. Shawn Michaels had to wash down 4 pain pills, according to his book, before the match to get through it. His back was completely just demolished at that point. And he was adamant before the match as they were going over different ideas and spots and here's the plan, here's what's going to happen. He was adamant that Mike Tyson not place an Austin 316 shirt over his face after Tyson knocked him out. He told Pat Patterson, who was really gung-ho about the idea, he said to Patterson, look, I'm going to walk out. If you keep insisting on this, I'm going to walk out. So they relented. Tyson ended up doing it anyway. And Michaels made it very clear after the show was over. There was a post-show press conference with Austin and Tyson. And in the back of the room, who should storm in through the doors but a very angry Shawn Michaels, who was confronted by Shane McMahon trying to calm him down. And Michaels was going off on Shane and explaining that after everything I've done for this company, this is what you do. That's the disrespect that you show me. So he had to be calmed down. Eventually, Michaels walked away. Undertaker also revealed on the Broken Skull sessions recently that he lied to Shawn Michaels when he told him that whole story about him taping up his fists in the back, just in case things went sideways. Oh, that's just an urban legend. In fact, that's exactly what happened. Undertaker was ready to force Michaels back to that ring that night if he played any games. There were rumors, Michaels might not want to do business. He might not want to put Austin over. There was a lot of drama going on in the back. Undertaker was ready to throw down if need be. Because he knew Austin is going to be our meal ticket. Austin's the next big thing here in this company. He's the one that they're building around. You got to do business. Undertaker's all about doing business. And if Michaels didn't want to do business, then Undertaker was going to do something about it. And on Raw the next night, Sean Waltman returned to the company as Triple H took over as the new leader of D-Generation X. And it was the end of an era. Oh, broke my heart to see this. The end of the Reggie Parks Winged Eagle Championship belt in favor of the new Jamar Big Eagle belt that they gave Stone Cold. The Big Eagle that was popularized during the Attitude Era, that's a beautiful belt too. actually have both replicas here. It looked very different. It was not, it kind of evolved. The first Jamar belt with that blue strap that debuted looked like a SmackDown belt. It was a nice looking belt, but it was a little bit different than what it ultimately morphed into. But that was the new belt that they debuted, and Austin said on a podcast years ago that he was backstage at an event, and Road Warrior Hawk was the one who suggested that, you know what, you should have your own belt to fit this whole idea that you're a rebel, you don't do what people tell you to do, you don't conform, you don't do what the company tells you to do, you don't just carry around the company's, property. You should have your own belt made. And from that came the concept of the Smoking Skull belt. Funny enough, Hawk is also the one who came up with the idea for the name Paul Bear as a manager for The Undertaker. And when did he come up with this idea, supposedly? He came up with this idea while on the commode in the bathroom in the locker room. I don't know, maybe he overheard a conversation that was happening or whatever. I could just picture it like he's in the bathroom. You don't see him, but you hear him. How about Paul Bear? And just like that, a legend was born. Hey, look, some of us do our best thinking on the throne. Apparently, Hawk was very creative. He had a very creative mind, even when he was on the toilet. So Austin, without WWE's knowledge, he said nothing to the company. He said nothing to Vince McMahon. He went to Jamar, and he had them create a new belt. There were actually two belts made, a silver and a gold Smoking Skull design. I've seen the photo of he with the belt maker holding up both of them. Austin kept the silver one for himself, and he used the gold one on TV the first time without Vince McMahon's knowledge. And apparently McMahon was really pissed off about it, and he ordered him to use their belt, use the Big Eagle belt, which he did. But the fan reaction was so intense, McMahon ultimately relented, and he let Austin go ahead and use the Smoking Skull belt, which I'm sure they've made mucho dinero off of with all the belt replicas. Belt replicas are a very big business right now for WWE, more so now than ever. That's why you see them coming out with all these custom belts. A few months ago, they released a commemorative China Intercontinental belt. They had an Eddie Guerrero commemorative belt with the leather strap. It was the same design as the tights that he wore the night that he beat Brock Lesnar. They have an Undertaker belt, an Austin, like a different Austin belt. It's big business. I'm sure they've sold a lot of those Smoking Skull belts over the years. WrestleMania 2000 had a 12-hour WrestleMania all-day-long pre-show leading up to the event. Was it 12 hours? Maybe it was 8 hours. I don't know. It was a long-ass time, and I know this because I sat through the whole damn thing because I'm an idiot. I am an idiot. I don't know. I just like, back then there was no network, right? You had your tapes. That was it. So them showing classic footage of all the WrestleManias and the old stuff with Hogan and Savage and everything else, like I lived for that. So I wanted to make sure that I was watching it. I took a few bathroom breaks, but I had that on my TV all day leading up to WrestleMania that night. The show featured 11 hardcore title changes in a hardcore battle royal where Crash Holly was supposed to retain, but referee Tim White had someone mistime the count in his ear. They were like counting him down or something, and they fucked up the timing of the finish. So Hardcore Holly won the belt instead. Tim White got reamed out in the back over it. Really wasn't his fault. Hardcore Holly later in the show yelled at Michael Cole in a backstage interview segment, called him a little shithead, and walked off. Well, hey, if the shoe fits. And in a prelude to their TLC matches, Edge and Christian won a triangle ladder match for the tag team titles over the Hardys and the Dudleys. Chris Jericho, he was on the original poster for this show, poster art, for the Fatal 4-Way main event, but he was removed weeks before the show when they made the call to unretire Mick Foley, who had just retired the month before. Unretired him to give him a spot in the WrestleMania main event. And Triple H became the first heel to close out the WrestleMania main event with a championship win. Of course, that should have been Triple H and Rock one-on-one, but Stone Cold was not ready to come back yet. He was still recovering from neck surgery. They did get Austin back the following month at Backlash. And I always say, and a lot of people do, I think, say the same thing, that the Backlash that year was WrestleMania. If you look at that card, you had Jericho and Benoit one-on-one. You had Rock and Triple H, which is what the main event should have been. There were a couple of other matches. I know they had the light heavyweight title match. I think it was Scotty 2 Hotty and Dean Malenko. That ended up being a very good match as well. But you look at that card, especially that main event, that really was WrestleMania. WrestleMania came a month later that year. Which brings us to probably top to bottom, the greatest WrestleMania of all time. WrestleMania X7 on April 1st, 2001. From the Houston Astrodome, the end of the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era died when Stone Cold shook hands with Vince McMahon. It died. And so did business. Although not right away. But it did begin a steady decline from their peak for the company. It was a busy week leading up to WrestleMania. WWE bought WCW. We had the Raw Nitro simulcast 6 days before this show. That very same night, that Monday before WrestleMania, Shawn Michaels, who was to have been involved in some capacity in the show, and possibly in the Undertaker Triple H match, I don't think as a referee, but he very likely would have had some kind of role. He would have made some kind of appearance on the pay-per-view. He showed up to Raw that Monday in no condition to perform. He was all pilled up or boozed up or maybe both. And he started an argument with Chris Jericho at Gorilla over the fact that he was dressed up as Doink the Clown, which Jericho was because he was doing a segment, he was doing a run-in on a segment or a match with William Regal, who was his opponent at WrestleMania. Per Jericho's second book, the exchange went something like this, with Shawn's eyes drooping and he was slurring his words. This is how the exchange went. Are you doing the Doink gimmick now? No, I'm just doing it for tonight. I'm ambushing Regal. So you're going to be Doink now? No, I'm just doing it for one night as a way to surprise Regal. But why do you have to be Doink? But I'm not Doink, Shawn. It's just for tonight. And Shawn Michaels shakes his head and just walks off. I don't like it. They should never have made you Doink. Jericho said it felt like an Abbott and Costello Who's on First routine, only it was Who's on Drugs. His words. Michaels ended up passing out in Vince McMahon's office and he was fired. And he didn't speak with Triple H for more than a year after that because he felt that he did stick up for him. I've heard different accounts of this. Either that he didn't stick up for him or Triple H may have been the one to kind of drop a dime on him and rat him out when he found him in Vince's office. I don't know exactly how it played out, but Michaels clearly was not happy with Triple H, and I think ultimately it was Kevin Nash who kind of talked to Shawn and said, look, you got to reach out to Hunter on this, and you guys got to patch things up, and eventually they were able to make nice. Shane McMahon beat Vince McMahon in a match where Linda McMahon got one of the biggest pops of the night. No joke. Who would have thunk it? It's a great moment, though, watching her rise up from that chair. Edge and Christian won TLC 2. And we got the iconic spear to Jeff Hardy off the ladder from about 16 feet up in the air. And then Jeff knocked out Spike Dudley's front teeth with a swanton bomb. The Iron Sheik won a gimmick battle royal of old-timers because he was too fucking old and decrepit to be thrown out over the top rope. So, of course, he was going to win. Bobby Heenan had the great line, by the time he makes it to the ring, it'll be WrestleMania 38. It was the last time we had Bobby Heenan on commentary. He sat alongside Mean Gene Okerlund for the Battle Royal. And it makes me sad because you know that if Gorilla Monsoon was still alive, and he was doing well, he wasn't sick, we would have had a Monsoon and Heenan reunion that night. Oh, it would have been... you Talk about this WrestleMania being maybe the greatest of all time. This would have just sealed the deal. To get Monsoon and Heenan back on commentary, even just for one comedy match. Are you kidding me? And Stone Cold beat The Rock to win the WWE title with an assist from Vince McMahon, who he shook hands with after the match. They turned him heel in Texas, even though the people cheered for him anyway. It was Austin's idea to turn heel. He thought that he was getting stale and he wanted to try something different. But he did briefly think of calling an audible. He almost had second thoughts, and in the moment, he thought of, after shaking Vince's hand, kicking him in the gut and dropping him with a stunner, but he decided against it.